found my passion in linguistics during my studies, I'm very happy to share this passion with you today and to introduce to you a study I've conducted. As you can see, the title of my presentation is This Linguistic Adventure, Processing of Impersonal Pronouns by O2 Speakers of English. So, if you have always thought syntax is just about growing up some trees, I will prove you wrong today. Not many people believe that linguistics can be an adventure, but the language phenomena that linguists have spent decades uncovering have an impact on the way we use language every day. One word class we all rely on are pronouns. Maybe you have never paid attention to when and how you use pronouns, but I can tell you that we all use them. Therefore, today I want to take you on an adventure discovering the case of how O2 speakers of English interpret the impersonal pronouns it and this. Before we dive deeper into my investigation, the pronoun use of O2 speakers, I will first provide you with the background knowledge you will need for our case. We will encounter two questions. First, what is special about the pronouns it and this? And second, how do L2 speakers interpret these pronouns? After that, I will introduce you to my investigation, which was a reaction time experiment, and then we'll look at the results of the experiment. So when we talk about impersonal pronouns, it is particularly interesting to consider it and this. Of course, we know that it can also be used as a personal pronoun, but the special characteristic of the pronoun it is that unlike any other personal pronoun, it can be used for non-personal reference. And today we will concentrate exactly on this impersonal use of it. And this is also exactly the point where it and the demonstrative this are similar. Both pronouns can be used as an anaphora, which means that they are used to refer to a previously mentioned discourse entity. As well as both pronouns can refer back to a noun phrase, events, or prepositions. Let me explain to you what that means with the help of one example. When we consider the declarative sentence, Eva stole her sister's shirt, it and this can either refer back to the noun phrase, her sister's shirt, as in the first sentence, it or this was not the right size, or it and this can refer to an entire proposition, which means the pronouns refer to the truth condition of the sentence, as illustrated in the second example. In the example sentence, it or this was not the right behavior, the pronouns refer to the whole statement that Eva stole her sister's shirt. We can also call the elements that pronouns refer to antecedent. And it is important for you to know the term antecedent because it will come up more often in my presentation. Despite these similarities, linguists expect differences in the use of it and this. But before I tell you what this expectation is based on, you can test the use of it and this yourself. So your task now is to decide whether you would fill the gap with the pronoun it or this in the sentences you're about to see now. Okay, so maybe some of you have noticed the difference in the use of it and this. Linguists expect it and this to prefer different antecedents based on the salient account. They found that it prefers antecedents that are more salient and more familiar from the previous discourse, while this prefers less salient and less familiar antecedents. So now you may be wondering how antecedents can differ in salience in a discourse. When we look at the sentence, Eva stole her sister's shirt again, the noun phrase, her sister's shirt, is more salient because it is less complex and in focus of attention, while the non-NP, the action that Eva stole the shirt, is less salient because it is more complex and requires the reader to combine the subject and the predicate. Nevertheless, this is not based on any grammatical rule. The question is whether this is also realized in natural discourse. The linguist Choquet Stewart of Ferreira conducted two experiments to answer this question. In a sentence completion experiment, they found that A1 speakers of English prefer the anaphora it when referring to a noun phrase. You can see this in example 1a. Here, the noun size indicates a reference to the noun phrase, and therefore it is used. Secondly, they found that the demonstrative this was preferred when focusing on a non-NP entity. In example 1b, the noun behavior indicates a reference to the non-NP entity, and therefore the pronoun this is used. Then, in the second part of the study, they conducted a reading time experiment, in which they found that, in general, less salient antecedents take longer to be processed than salient antecedents. Moreover, the participant took longer to process sentences when it referred to a non-noun phrase entity and this referred to a noun phrase. So after I saw these results, of course, as a non-native speaker of English, I was interested in how A2 speakers of English use these pronouns and whether similar patterns occur, even though it has not been taught through any grammatical rule. So therefore, I came up with the research question: do A2 speakers of English interpret impersonal pronouns similar to A1 speakers? And since I'm predicting similarity to A1 speakers of English, I tested two hypotheses. First, A1 speakers of English tend to use it to refer to a noun phrase and this to refer to a non-NP entity. And second, reaction times are longer when a non-NP entity is referred to with it or when a noun phrase is referred to with this. For my investigation, I conducted a reaction time experiment with 14 participants to examine the pronoun use on a moment-by-moment bias. All participants were native speakers of German and advanced English speakers. To ensure that all were advanced speakers of English, I had a specific group of participants. The participants were either students of English, had already obtained a bachelor's degree in English, or worked in a company with English as the business language. The sentences used for my experiment were constructed based on the sentences Schokal and her colleagues used in the experiment. And in my experiment, I included 30 sentences with two levels of referent type, so a noun phrase and a non-noun phrase. These sentences were used to test which pronoun the participants used to refer to the antecedent. And just to give you a little reminder, we already saw an example, but example 2 illustrates the two conditions again. While in sentence 2a, the noun shop was used to indicate reference to the noun phrase, a fashion store, the noun risk in 2b indicates reference to the non-NP entity. So Tom opened a fashion store. Attention was paid that the sentences differed only in the disambiguating noun and that commonly used words were used to avoid extra processing difficulties, especially because I was testing with A2 speakers of English. Okay, so now we turn to what I think the most interesting part of my investigation, the procedure. The reaction time experiment was constructed with the free PsychoPy software. After a short introduction, participants were asked to decide which pronoun to put in the gap by clicking T for this and I for it, just similar to the directions I gave you before. Since I assume not everyone here has created or participated in a reaction time experiment before, let me quickly show you what this looked like for the participants. So please take a look at the video on the right. Okay, as you saw, the tasks and all items were presented on a computer screen with a white font on a gray background. Important here is that the items were randomized for each participant. In this way, it was possible to capture two factors. First, the preference for it or this according to antecedent type, and second, the reaction times, which were recorded by the button press response. So now that we all know how the investigation worked, let us turn to the outcomes of my study. To answer my first hypothesis, I counted how often it or this was used to refer to a noun phrase or a non-NP entity. First, in table 1, we can see that it was more frequently used than this in all of the 420 sentences. Where it was used in 274 sentences, this was used only half as often in 146 sentences. Diagram 1 helps us to take a closer look into the different conditions. The figure shows the frequency of it and this in all instances in percent. Blue indicates reference to a noun phrase and red to a non-NP entity. Right at the first glance, we can observe that according to my prediction, it was preferred when referring to a noun phrase, and this was preferred when referring to a predicate or non-NP entity. To test if these results are significant, I did a chi-square test, which revealed that the results are significant at p below 0.001. In the next step, I looked at the reaction times of the participants. Therefore, diagram 2 shows the mean reaction times in all conditions in milliseconds. Here, green presents all instances with it, and yellow with this. We can see that, similar to the prediction, the mean reaction time was longer when a noun phrase is referred to with this. But looking at the non-NP entity, it is striking that the mean reaction time for this was also longer. So we can observe is that in general, sentences take longer to process when reference is made with this. When we look at diagram 3, surprisingly, the diagram shows that the mean reaction times were longer in sentences where reference was made to the noun phrase than to the predicate. But we can see here that there's only a small difference in the mean reaction times, which makes the results less meaningful at this point. But what do we learn from the results? The findings reveal that L2 speakers use the same interpretation patterns as native speakers because they prefer it when referring to a noun phrase and this when referring to a non-NP entity. This shows that we can also observe an effect of salience in the L2 speakers' pronoun use. And so my first hypothesis was supported. Considering the reaction times, my second hypothesis was only partly supported because the mean reaction times for this were longer in both conditions. Although I expected a shorter meaning reaction time for this when reference was made to a non-NP entity. Since the long reaction times for this with reference to a non-NP entity were surprising, I checked for any other factor that might be influencing the use of the pronoun. So I observed that in the non-NP sentences where this was used, the disambiguating nouns were more abstract, like the nouns behavior or decision, while in non-NP sentences where it was used, the nouns were less abstract, or I would say more tangible and imaginable, like the word accident. So the processing of this by L2 speakers might be influenced by the degree of abstractness of the disambiguating noun. However, this is a topic for further investigation. So future research would benefit from considering the influence of the complexity and the abstractness of nouns following the pronoun this. So here you can see the references I used for my study. You can look at these references if I make you interested in the topic of pronouns and if you realize that, of course, linguistics can be an adventure. Thank you for your attention and for joining this linguistic adventure today.